Spektrum Metrics has expanded our industry-leading web spectrum viewer to include countries from across the globe. The web spectrum viewer allows each country's spectrum allocation to be viewed across county-sized boundaries with advanced analytics into various spectrum depths, megahertz pops, licensed population, NR channel outputs, and mapping. Today we're going to examine the mapping module, which brings the tabular outputs from the spectrum depth module and the geographic outputs from the spectrum grid module to life on a national map. So we're going to go jump into the United States first. All right, to choose mapping, it's the mapping tab on the left side of the screen. Now, as this opens up, we can see that the carrier selected or displayed is AT&T. We're looking at the mobile carrier bands. You could actually choose millimeter wave band as well. And we're looking at the spectrum depth and the total. So it's all the spectrum that AT&T has by county in the mobile carrier spectrum bands. Sometimes it's nice to turn on an overlay, so we have choices where you can choose CMA boundaries, PEA boundaries, or state boundaries. I find that state boundaries are helpful to kind of get a relationship to where you are in the country. Another choice, we're starting right now with looking at spectrum depth by frequency band, and so we can see the total by frequency band. If we were to change and choose, say, 600 megahertz, that will show how much spectrum AT&T has in the 600 megahertz band. To look at a different way of looking at the map, we can choose by NR band. So the NR band, I'm going to choose NR band 66 because it encompasses both the AWS-1 spectrum and the AWS-3 spectrum. So this will give you details on all of AT&T's spectrum at a county level in just the N66 band. The last analysis we'll look at here will be the channel block. So channel block allows us to see a individual channel. So right now it's defaulting to show us low band spectrum and the 600 megahertz A block, versus seeing what AT&T owns in perhaps the B block. Clearly, they seem to have more A block than B block. This is helpful when you're looking at some of the specialty frequency bands. So I'm going to go to the 700 megahertz E block. This is a band that AT&T and EchoStar own collectively. So what you can see is that particular block of spectrum, and this is supplemental downlink spectrum, 5 megahertz of additional downlink spectrum that's not paired. AT&T controls it in California, a little bit in Arizona, and the Northeast. If we were to change carriers and now choose Dish, you will see that Dish does in fact control all the rest of the spectrum. Here under data type, we have 3 different data types: who it's licensed to, who currently controls it, and we're looking at who will control it in the future. So this has not been subject to any acquisitions by AT&T or SpaceX. This is still in Dish control. The other type of analysis we can do in the mapping module is look at spectrum ownership. So with spectrum ownership, we are essentially looking down a column of the spectrum grid. So for a channel everywhere in the country, who actually owns it, but it allows you to see geographically what adjacent markets are and whether there are blocks of geographic space that need to be potentially purchased to add to the footprint. So essentially here we're looking at, again, the 600 megahertz A block, and you can see in the branding colors, the purple fuchsia is what T-Mobile controls. Blue is what is controlled by AT&T, and then the gray is what the FCC actually controls. So now we're going to go ahead and move on and look at this same analysis in a different country, which will be Mexico first. So now pops open a map for Mexico with showing all the municipals. That's the county boundaries essentially for Mexico. AT&T happens to be one of really only 2 carriers that are nationwide carriers in Mexico. And so we're looking again, we'll go ahead and switch away from AT&T and go to Telcel, the other national carrier. And so we're able to see their total spectrum depth. I'm going to go ahead and choose to put state boundaries on so you can kind of see, you have Baja California North and Baja California South, and got Mexico City kind of down in this area, along with spectrum depth. You will notice in all the modules, as you go across the map, you see a display that indicates the particular county-shaped geographic area that you're looking at and the total spectrum depth. If I was to change this to US, we now see what Telcel controls and the new value of US being 80 megahertz. Looking at this from an NR standpoint, Mexico has opted to license its spectrum in a few of the bands on the international standard. So I'm going to go ahead and choose N38. So N38 is providing TDD spectrum, TDD in the 2.5 band. So what we kind of conclude is it doesn't look like Telcel has any TDD spectrum. We'll go ahead and check and see if AT&T does. So AT&T does have N38 spectrum. And from a channel perspective, let's go ahead and just look at, we're going to go to lower mid, and then we're going to go ahead and choose the AWS A channel in Mexico. And we're kind of chasing carriers here to see. Okay, so that's a 20 megahertz block of spectrum, and that's basically nationwide controlled by Telcel. Moving over to spectrum ownership. The 600 megahertz band is up for auction, so we're going to go ahead and move over to the 700 megahertz. This is all nationally owned by a carrier called Red. Let's go ahead and go to cellular so we can get Telcel or AT&T on the line. So when we display cellular, so when we choose AT&T and spectrum ownership in cellular, you can see that this particular cellular A channel is owned by AT&T kind of in the southern Mexico area. From the mapping module, if you want to see go back to the spectrum grid, you can click on any particular municipal, and then it will take us back to the spectrum grid so that you can see for the cellular spectrum how the A block is a 1 megahertz block, a 10 megahertz block, a 10 megahertz block, and then the smaller A and B blocks. So it's important to understand how each of those blocks is allocated on the national level. So now we'll go ahead and jump over to Canada. So in Canada, we're going to go kind of through the same process. In Canada, the county level areas are called Tier 4 service areas. Canada, the northern part of Canada is hardly has any population, so very, very large licensing areas. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the province level, basically Canada's states. So you can see kind of what those boundaries are. And so now we're looking at Bell Canada and their total spectrum. I'm going to go ahead and now choose to look at Bell Canada's PCS spectrum. We can also look at the NR band. So Choosing N13 allows us to see who has the spectrum that is compatible with Verizon's systems in the US. So Bell Canada does appear to be that carrier. And then for specific channel blocks, I don't know whether there are any specific channel blocks that are going to show us anything particularly special, but in this case, the A block of AWS in one particular province is controlled by Bell Canada. So now our final view is we're going to go look at Germany. So as we arrive here at Germany, we're going to go ahead and choose mapping, and we see the geographic area for Deutsche Telekom. We're going to go ahead and change this. Instead of looking at right now the total frequency band, we'll go ahead and go to NR band. And we're now looking at band 20. All right, well, thank you very much for watching our mapping module demonstration.